Welcome everyone, my name is Vishwa Mohan and I welcome to you to this amazing YouTube channel which is PW Skills for Tech. इस वीडियो में I am going to talk about that in year 2023 and going ahead, if someone wants to make it big in the field of full stack web development, what should be his path? But before I go and get started, I'll try to first of all understand who this video is for. So anyone who is willing to get started, anyone who wants to make it big in the area of software development, anyone who is fascinated by the different apps that we use on a day-to-day basis, say for example Facebook, Instagram, और आप ये सोचते हो कि भैया इसको बनाते कैसे हैं, इसके अंदर की इंजीनियरिंग क्या है, क्या मैं भी can I also someday make these applications? So if you're curious around that, or you're planning to apply for the interviews, or you want to start doing some kind of freelancing, or you want to start your own company itself, whatever your reason is, ये roadmap आपको clarity देगा that what is needed today in 2023 and going ahead to become a solid rockstar developer in the field of web application. So that's number one. Number two, the medium of instruction is going to be in English. मैं हिंदी में काफी सक्षम हूँ आपको समझाने में, पर अगर मैं रियलिटी की बात बोलूं, आई एम नॉट हेयर टू क्रैक जोक्स, ठीक है। मैं आपके सिर्फ एंटरटेनमेंट के लिए नहीं हूं। मुझे लगता है कि स्किलिंग इज अ वेरी सीरियस प्रोफेशन। अल्टीमेटली आपका जो गोल है, या तो आप किसी फ्रीलांसिंग करके किसी क्लाइंट से काम कर रहे होंगे, या फिर आप किसी एक बड़ी कंपनी में, अ बिग एमएनसी, यू वुड बी वर्किंग अराउंड। So when you work for these companies, या फिर आप फ्रीलांस करते हो, तो देयर हाई चांसेस कि आप सॉफ्टवेयर की दुनिया में you will have to interact with the people from the globe, from the other countries, और वहां पे आप हिंदी में काम नहीं चला पाएंगे. You will definitely need a good communicative way to make yourself be a part of this professional world. So this is the high time when you should start learning English. और अंग्रेजी सीखने का सबसे आसान तरीका यह है कि आप अंग्रेजी में बोलना चालू कर दो, आप वेट मत करो, और whatever that you are watching, try to see it in English itself. So all the videos in this platform will try to keep it primarily in English, in simple English, so that you first, it's easy for you to understand, and number two, we are also making sure that in the process you are getting ready for this professional world. So let's get started with the understanding that what is a full stack web developer. ठीक है, तो आगे बढ़ते हैं। तो आज के डेट में if I go and talk about year 2023, we are all talking about something called as a web application. Web application, right? What is a web application? So any application that you go and open either in your mobile phone or in your laptop or a tablet, that's typically is called as a web application. Say for example, I have opened, say for example, linkedin.com. So what that got opened in my browser is a typical example of a web application. Fair enough? Now, if I talk about the web applications, any web application as such, in the today's modern world, they are built in three different layers. What are those layers? So one of the layer is called as the front end, or you also can call it as a visualization layer. It's typically the layer which the end user interacts. So if I give the example, the last window that I showed up, the last window that I showed up, this one, this is a example of a front end, right? So you type www.linkedin.com and whatever the profile that came up is an example of the front end. So that's how I deal with, I can scroll down, up and down and see all the information out here. So that's the front end. And specifically the engineers who are working on this layer, right? The engineers who build this, they are called as front end engineers. तो वो सारे लोग जो सिर्फ इस पे फोकस करेंगे, सर उसको क्या बोलेंगे? We will be calling them as the front end engineers. Perfect. Now, have you ever thought of in this front end, say for example, there's so much of information, right? My details. Then if I go and click on the home, I get such a lots of the home feed. Then I have something like messages and all that stuff. Have you ever thought of that from where this data is coming up? Who is powering that much of data to the front end. That layer which powers the data to the front end, that comes from, sir, backend. I also go and call the backend as a brain of the system. Brain of the system. This is the layer where data manipulation happens. All the crunching and munching of the data happens in this layer itself, right? And obviously by now you would have easily guessed that those folks who are expert, who are the masters in learning the backend, they will be called as what? They will be called as backend engineers. उनको क्या बोलेंगे सर अपन? Backend engineers. तो वन हु वर्क्स ऑन द फ्रंट एंड, जो विजुअलाइजेशन लेयर है, जो आप मोबाइल फोन में खोल के देखते हो, जो आप वेब ऐप में देखते हो, दे आर टिपिकली कॉल्ड एज द फ्रंट एंड इंजीनियर्स. Those engineers who plays with data, do the crunching and munting, make sure that this data is available for the front end, they are called as backend engineers. For example, primarily all my life, most of the time I have worked like a backend engineer. Awesome. Now once I've done that, have you ever thought of that every time you go and upload a photograph on Instagram, for example, or Facebook for an example, or the text messages that you have written, or WhatsApp message that you have written to someone, even if you come after a few days or weeks or months, those messages, those photographs are never lost. How is that possible? What is that which enables these applications to hold that information? It's only possible because all these big applications, they keep on storing your data, keep on storing that information. And that layer which stores data for you when you're building a modern day web application is called as database layers. And primarily the folks who are expert in dealing with databases, they are called as DBAs. They are called as DBAs. Awesome. So I know who is a front-end engineers who works on the layer which is mostly used by the external world. Backend engineers are those folks who are the brain of the system, right? And the database are more of like the people who manipulates and plays with the data. So we have understood all these three. If I have to give you a visualization, a simple example to clearly identify, let's take an example of a restaurant. So in the case of a restaurant, right, every restaurant will have a dining area, right? Dining area is the one which you keep well clean, decorated, right? Because this is the place where your end user or customers comes and sits, right? So the customer enjoys your dining area. So the first thing to attract your customer is to make sure your dining area is clean, it's well decorated, people are feeling welcome, so the people will feel comfortable coming in there, right? So it's very important. But ultimately, the people will keep repeating to come to your restaurant only when you go and provide the right food, right? So the main power or the main fact for the popularity of a restaurant is around how well the food is being served, right? So basically what you serve on the tables in the restaurant is being served by something called as a kitchen, right? The kitchen is the one which makes sure that your master chefs, right, try to play with all the food items and provide that tasty food जिसको कि ये लोग enjoy कर पाए in the dining area itself, right? So in this example, if you talk about the dining area where customers actually comes in, you can consider it like a front end. Whereas the actual area where the food is being played with which the the amazing dishes are made, delicious enough so that people can just bite their fingers and they're forced to come again and again, that typical layer will be called as the backend, right? And in the kitchen, you know that the food item has to be stored so that it could be used later on. So you can think of all the storage areas like kitchen, like the fridge, or basically the different boxes where you go and keep the item so that it could be reused later. Those things you can think of more of like a database. So I believe now you have got a little visualization around that what a web application is, what are the different layers, and how these all interact, right? So coming back to this layer, there are three layers of web application: front end, back end, and the databases. So we have a front end engineer, we have the back end engineers, and we have a DBAs. But in today's modern world, no one, in the today's modern world, if I go and talk about, previously we would have three kinds of people. People who know only front end, they are called as the front end engineers. People who knew only the back end, they were called as back end engineers. And people who know only databases, they were called as DBAs. But in today's fast-paced world, we have a kind of companies which is coming up, which is called as startups. Startups are the companies which are giving the maximum employment in the market. Now, the startups always have two kind of constraints: constraint of resources and constraint of time. उनके पास या तो लोगों की कमी होती है, पैसों की कमी होती है, या तो टाइम की कमी होती है. So they cannot afford to have many people. And that's why in today's world, they have started looking for some superhuman, some super specie who knows all of this. जिसको कि front end भी पता है, the person knows the back end also, the person knows the DBA also. And this superhuman, he is not called Shaktiman. He is called what? He is called full stack developer. Right? So the person who knows everything from the front end to the back end to the DBAs, he is the modern world Shaktiman. And who's that called? That is called as full stack developer. And when the same person tries to build all these things, front end भी बना दो, back end भी बना दो, database भी बना दो, तो उसको अपन क्या कहते हैं? That is called as a full stack web development. That is called as the full stack web development. So I believe now you all have got very crisp understanding. Put that into the comments अगर आपको समझ में आया है तो. What is a full stack development? अगर एक इंसान आपके जैसा या मेरे जैसा is aware of everything कि भैया front end how do I make it, back end how do I make it, database how do I manage, and I'm able to do it all myself, I'm a super solid full stack developer. And what I do is called as a full stack development. And if I do that, I'm the man of the hour. Everyone will be behind me to get me a job. Right? That's what a full stack development is. Now, how do I become this superhuman? How do I become this, the full stack developer in the modern world, so that going ahead, the companies are behind me to hire me? So let's understand the whole roadmap, that how someone can become a full stack web developer. To start with, to become a full stack web developer, you need to understand certain foundations, the P0 things to start with. So the first thing that you need to get started with is definitely something called as HTML. So HTML is basically, the basic foundations on which typical websites are built. So for example, I give you the example of LinkedIn, right? So if I go and open again, so whole thing that you see, right, this whole stuff, right, this would have been written in some programming way, right? And that something which enables this whole structure, that's typically is called as HTML. So if I go and see that page source, right, whatever that you see is basically nothing but a HTML file, right? So HTML is the basic building block on which any websites are built, sir. So if you're planning to become a good web developer, I think having a basic understanding of HTML is definitely important. So HTML is like building a house. आपने अपने builder को बोला कि मेरे लिए घर बना दो. So the HTML is like building a house with bricks, cement, sand, stones, right? So it will get you the structure. Now just having a house of the brick, cement, sand, stone is not good enough. It's not livable. You'd like it to look better, look pleasant, right? You'd like to have, scenic, so that you feel like going there. So for doing this, what you do, you typically do, you need to, once it is done, then you have to do the painting. Then you have to do the interior designing. The same thing when you do in the world of making websites, you do it with the help of CSS. So CSS you can think of more of like someone who will paint your websites, someone who will do the interior designing of your websites, right? So HTML is like creating your website, the framework, the whole structure, decorating it, designing it, giving it the appeal so that people feel like coming to your websites. That's all being done with the help of CSS. But what happens, when you work in the companies these days, one simple project, multiple people might be working, right? Multiple folks will be working on the same project. Now, in order to ensure that all the people are having the same test, they're maintaining the minimum standard, minimum benchmark is being satisfied, we need to adopt something called as framework. Say for example, the CSS itself, it's all about designing, it's more of like, a little artistic nature. Now, different people will have the different understanding of the CSS, different way of designing stuff. So when we work as a group, we would like to make sure that minimum standard is maintained, minimum standard. We'd like to make sure that, no boilerplate codes, easily collaborate, right? So in order to achieve all this stuff, we use something called as a framework. So आप देखोगे normally when you start working for any company, you don't work directly on a programming language. You always make use of a framework so that minimum thing is definitely guaranteed. You get a structure. You don't need to write the boilerplate codes. You can easily collaborate. So for the CSS, two of the very popular framework that we have is around the Bootstrap and Tailwind. And as we see, as we move further, you'll find that for every programming language, when you work in an industry, you need to learn a framework. So the foundation, you get started with HTML, then you start learning the basics of CSS. And then once you are done with that, you learn one of these framework like Bootstrap or Tailwind. Perfect. So we have now covered the foundation. Let's try to move on to the next stage. What should we do now? The next step is around the JavaScript. So if I take the same example of the house, so we first of all using HTML, we build the house. Then when you use CSS, it's more of like designing the house. And now in the modern houses, right? Typically in the modern houses, if you go and talk about, you'd like to bring some kind of automation, right? House security, right? You add some devices, right? All these things, right? The same thing on your website if you like to make something dynamic. For example, user should be allowed to log in, user should be allowed to write messages, user should be able to post something. All those dynamic things that you can do on a website is done with the help of JavaScript. So JavaScript allows you to do the dynamic behavior on website. So learning all these three things, if I go and again reiterate, if you want to get started, the basic thing that you need to get started is that you have to understand what is HTML, you have to understand what is CSS, and you have to understand, sir, what is JavaScript. These are the very first three basic things that you need to master in your path to become a solid web developer. Once you have done that, let's try to see that what today the modern world is doing to learn more. So the next thing is the front end part, mastering front end part. So for example, when I go and saw you this is the basically a front end. How do I build an application like LinkedIn today? In order to do this, again, we need to make use of a framework. Let's say that in the market today, to do the front end, there are different frameworks which is available. Say for example, you have something called as Angular. You can use something called as Vue. You can use something called Svelte, right? But if I talk about what is the hottest library in the market available today to build the front end, and the answer to that is React. So if you want to be a solid rock star modern web developer and you want to build a very dynamic, responsive front end application, you need to master this React concept. Almost every company these days, including all the big wigs like Microsoft, LinkedIn, Google, they all are investing a lot in learning the React. So you need to master this React concepts to become a solid front-end developer. So now once you have done the front-end wala part, right? The next thing which is pending is around the database. Because this mastering database will be needed for you to understand the concept around the backend. See, in today's modern world, no matter what kind of application you are building, chotu application, big application, super scalable application, every application these days, they need some way to store data so that when they restart their application, they don't lose anything. Right? So the different flavors of the databases available in the market. You have something called SQL database, you have something called NoSQL databases. Example of a NoSQL database is MongoDB. Example of a SQL database is MySQL. So a lot of databases, underlying principles might be different, but we need to on a high level understand both these types. Like when do we make use of relational database? When do I make use of NoSQL database? Inside the NoSQL world itself, there are so many different kind of databases like key value, columnar, right? So we need to understand all these types, when to make use of it, and that's when we'll be able to make a right choice of a database when we are building the application. Once you have done this, mastering database has been done, then finally it comes the backend. Now if I talk about the modern world, the backend could be done in the multiple languages. Say for example, you can do using Java, and for that you use a framework called as Express. You can do using Python, and for that you use something called as Django. Similarly, when you make use of JavaScript, right? So you use a runtime environment called as node.js, and you use a framework which is called as an Express. Now why I have highlighted upon the JavaScript today? Because one of the unique point about JavaScript is that, when you become these days, JavaScript could be used in both front end, and JavaScript could be also used in the back end. And I'm able to use in the backend because of something called as node.js. So because of the coming of the node.js, it allowed JavaScript to be used for building the backend application also. Now, what is the benefit? So today, when I talk about the companies, right? If they go and hire someone who knows JavaScript, then the same person could be used to make front end also and the back end also. So this person is like more productive. He is more flexible. And he is more, in that sense, full stack. So these days when I go and talk to someone is full stack developer, it's a de facto understanding that he is working on JavaScript stack itself. And that's why I have mentioned here primarily the JavaScript. So in order to master the backend, you definitely need to know the JavaScript, and then you need to understand the internals and the basics of Node.js and the framework Express. And with this whole cycle has got completed. So by now, what has happened? So you, who is a superhuman, who is trying to learn full stack development, you need to master all these three things. First, front end. And for that, you need to learn what? HTML. For that, you want to learn what? CSS. For that, you want to learn JavaScript. For CSS, you can use framework like, Bootstrap, Tailwind, right? For JavaScript, you use something called as React. Once you have learned front end, then you need to master the back end. For mastering the backend, you need two things. One, you need to learn the databases concepts. So it could be a SQL database or it could be a NoSQL database. And apart from that, there are other different tools. But if you follow the trend in the market, you need to learn JavaScript again. For that, you need Node.js and Express. Fair enough? Am I clear to everyone? I hope everyone is clear that what is a full stack development, who is called as a full stack developer. And in today's world, if you want to be a rock star full stack developer, What are the skills that you need to learn? Front end, back end, what are the skills that you need to learn? Perfect. Now, once that is done, as a software engineer, you might have several requirements. First of all, sometime in your company, you need to share or collaborate with others. That's number one. Sometime you might have the requirement that, okay, I have built this code, but I want to showcase it to the world. मैं दुनिया को दिखाना चाहता हूँ कि मैंने क्या कोड लिखा है. Right? So you want to share it to the world. Share to the world. Also, sometime, you wrote something very important on your laptop, but you are not relying on it. You're fearing as if मेरा laptop बंद हो जाता है, if it crashes, I will lose that data. In that case, what I like to have some kind of remote backup. Another situation I tell you, sometime your previous code was working और फिर आपने उसमें कुछ changes किए. You did some changes and your code has now started breaking up. It's not working. You want to go back, but so many changes you have done, you have just messed it up. How do you go back? So you want a clean solution to go back to the previous versions, the clean, switch between versions. In order to answer all of these, in order to achieve all of these and many much more functionality, we use something called as version control system. In the world of software, we always keep on creating multiple versions, and to control it in a seamless way, we have something called as a version control system. And one of the most commonly used tool or technique or software that the world is using these days is called as Git. Almost 90% companies are using this to do the version controlling of their systems. So if you want to become a rock solid full stack web developer, you also need to know this, because once you have developed an application, you need to make sure that you are able to share it to the world, you are able to collaborate, you are able to take a remote backup, and that's where the Git helps you out. So that's also important skill set that you should be making sure that is part of your skill set when you are applying for your next interview. So with this, we came to a conclusion. This is a complete tree structure for a full stack web development. If you try to give, you can break it into just two parts, front end and back end. In the front end, you need to start with the basics like HTML, CSS and the CSS frameworks. Then JavaScript library and these frameworks. Similarly, on the backend side, you need to learn, you can either choose the JavaScript stack or Python, PHP, Java, whatever that you choose from. And you need to have these kind of databases. So I hope now that all of you have got a very crystal clear and crisp understanding of that what should be a roadmap for a full stack web developer. Now, the next $1 million question is, how do I learn it? So for that, we are going to bring a lot of free content here on YouTube as well. So keep tuned in to this channel for getting more recent videos, the latest best quality videos around this to help you become a full stack developer. Not only that, we also have a lot of courses at a very affordable price on PW Skills website. So you can like to check all these details in the description, and feel free to put that into the comments that what topic next video would you like me to bring for you people, totally free on this community. Thank you and keep learning.